Hello and welcome to today's opening session of the CFO Days. I'm your host, Jorge Lluch, the co-founder and CEO at Abacum, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome all of you. I'm incredibly excited for today's session and to be sharing the stage with somebody that needs no introduction. Terese is a partner at Atomico, where she also sits in the investment committee. A little bit of context on our event. CFO Days is our online event for finance leaders to connect, share, and exchange on the most important topics influencing and impacting the finance world. Our agenda for the coming days includes 2 more days of panel discussions and fireside chats, with the participation of some of the most impressive finance professionals. Today's fireside chat will be about 45 minutes, and we are going to be covering the relationship between a CFO and the board. This is a topic that I'm incredibly passionate about, having had the opportunity of working and building fantastic relationship with investors over my years as a finance leader at Wallapop, TravelPerk, and now at Abacum. Our conversation today is going to be split into 2 parts. A fireside chat in which we explore the relationship between a CFO and its investors and how this cascades into topics such as fundraising, board reporting, and company strategy, followed by an audience Q&A. So please share your questions and as they come in the chat, and we will make sure to cover those towards the end. So let's kick off. Terese, I want to make sure you get a chance to introduce yourself and the work you're doing at Atomico.
Thank you so much, Jorge. I don't know, I think I do need the introduction, but you're very kind. So hi everyone, it's so exciting to be here. As a little bit of background, as Jorge mentioned, I work at one of the venture capital funds based in Europe, Atomico, which was a venture fund that was started about 16 years ago by Niklas Zennström, the founder of Skype. So we've been around for a while, and our main focus is on investing in fantastic companies. And we're actually very lucky to be investors in Abacum. So I know Jorge and the team incredibly well. But I'm very excited to be talking about this topic today because I spend a ton of my time both looking for incredible founders to invest in, but just as much time sitting on boards and working with companies, which is really where the fun begins. And a lot of that too has to do with working with CFOs. So I can't wait to have this chat.
Thank you very much, Terese. It's an absolute pleasure to have you today with us and to work with you in Abacum. We have chosen a set of topics for today's talk. Hope you and the audience find them interesting. I would like to start by addressing directly board management, and we will take it from there. So allow me to ask you, Terese, from your experience, as you mentioned, you've probably been in some boards already, and managing board dynamics and expectations between the company and its investors can be a balancing act. What essential elements or practices have you found instrumental in creating a productive relationship with the CFO and the company itself?
Yeah, it's a great question. And some of this is actually surprisingly basic, but not something that anyone always realizes is useful. So if we start at kind of the very beginning, when we think about, board relationships, board meetings, the key thing to that, unsurprisingly, is communication. And I would actually say over-communication doesn't exist in this forum at all. So I think having a very kind of open and continual conversation between the board and the not just CFO, but actually the whole C-suite, these learnings actually apply to everyone, is really key. And when we think about some of those core moments that we interact, so one of them is in board meetings, right? So they tend to happen once a quarter. And then sometimes you have meetings in between those as well, which I highly recommend. But if we think about the board meetings, what I find key to success in that forum in terms of working together is as much pre-discussion and communication as possible. So for example, with a lot of the founders that we work with, and this includes Jorge and the Abacum team, when we're about to go into a board meeting, we will know as investors what the topic of conversation will be because we've already discussed it. The CFO will have told us, hey, this is the type of analysis I'm thinking about showing. Would this be useful to you? Is this the right topic for this session? And we go back and forth and we discuss. And that's incredibly helpful because then there are no surprises when we get into the meeting. And then also I would say this is actually more to maybe some of the folks on the other side, to the investors in the room, if there are some of you as well. I think the key thing that we should do, and you as CFOs should also ask for that, to be honest, and it's completely okay to ask for it, is to say, well, we're going to send out our financial analysis, we'll send out our models, we'll send out our deck. Could you please have a look at it in advance? And also, if you can, send us any questions in advance. It's this tiny, small thing. It doesn't mean that you have to send out the materials, but it's a small thing, but it means that you, whenever you go into these meetings, you already know what some of us board members are thinking, and you can actually prep, and the discussion just becomes so much better. So I think those are some of the tiny tips to a successful relationship. And it's actually those learnings you can apply to any other interaction that you have, whether it's, investor syncs between board meetings, etc. But again, over communication does not exist.
Really happy to hear that, Terese. I think if I recall that probably was one of my early recommendations that I got. Also as a survival perspective, right? As a CFO, as a CFO and now a founder, avoiding surprises is always a good suggestion towards entering a board meeting. So that's something I did try in the past, and we try to keep today in Abacum. So make sure that investors have all the relevant information and all the data, and that we are all in the same page to have insightful and useful conversations. Because as founders or as board CFOs, that's what you expect, right? It's to get your support from your board in those relevant topics that you might be addressing.
Yeah, and I would say maybe just the last thing to add to that too, I think, as CFOs, you should also think about these interactions as it's not you giving something to the board only. Of course, there's that communication, but it's also our job as board members to help you, right? So think of it that way too. We're in that room so that we can provide you hopefully with some insightful feedback that can help steer you as well. So think of this as you're leveraging that group of people to help you in your day-to-day. It's not someone you go into to get, hopefully told off, right? Like that's not the situation. We are literally here to help. So think of us as a resource as well.
Thanks, Terese. Yes, great point. You were something that came to my mind, right? And let me see if you agree. I understand that building trust is a key component on that. No, it's fundamental in fundraising, board relationships. From an investor perspective, how do you look for ways to spend time getting to know the CFO or finance teams leaders of a company?
Yeah. So first of all, we sometimes have the luxury of, because we invest in early stage companies, sometimes we're actually part of the hiring process of the CFO, which is wonderful, right? So we get to know them pretty well from the beginning. That could be either because we're interviewing, etc. So that's a good starting point. But even without that, developing the trust is very much around, it's basic for a lot of relationships, getting to know someone. So what that really means is you're building a relationship with that person. And from an investor point of view, a board member point of view, the CFO is one of your most important touch-based people, right? And it kind of makes sense because the CFO is the person in the company that has all the data. They have all the strategic vision around what's actually going on in this company right now and where do we need to get to. So it's an incredibly important person for us to get to know. So I would say in terms of developing that trust, you should actually absolutely as CFOs say, well, why don't I grab lunch with this board member? Why don't I spend some time having coffee in person if you can? In-person interactions, that really helps. And then I think, in terms of kind of when we think about the actual deliverables and data, an absolute key point of developing trust too is as much transparency as possible. So, as you're going through the forecasting, you're looking at the data of what's happening in the company. I think being very open with the board on that is fantastic. And that is even small things like if you're going into a board meeting, usually, you will have slides where you're presenting the high-level takeaways of some of your analysis, but you can also send the raw data, right? Like you can absolutely do that too, because you don't have anything to hide. But what I think also is key there is if things are not going well, which they for sure will not always go well. I don't know any company where everything's just been smooth, sailing from the beginning. Like that's not realistic. If things aren't, point them out, like be transparent about them, show it in the data, because that's often where it comes up, right? It comes up in the revenue, it comes up because a budget was missed. I think another core point to that is if this happened, I wouldn't try to excuse it away because you feel like you have to be selling or, but really be transparent and say, okay, these 3 things went wrong. This is what we're doing to fix it. this is how we're thinking about it. And that obviously also will flow into some of the CEO conversation. But at the end of the day, you have a lot of the data that will show the financial health of the company. So I think that's kind of some of the things that I would point out. And I think that transparency, building in-person relationships, absolutely key. Sorry, I will mute for now.
No, don't worry, Terese. It's what, back in the days on COVID when everyone was at home. So
yep.
I also apologize. My kids will probably get from school home, and you might see some screaming around. So you were saying a couple of things that actually brought me back to when I was hired as CFO in 𝐂𝐼𝐻. It's true that in that hiring process, a couple of board members were part of that, and that helped me tremendously to get to know them. I already, had been sharing with them some personal experiences. We had engaged in some conversations, which then later on made my life at 𝐂𝐼𝐻 back then easier, right? Which is different probably as today in Abacum when we are board members, right? It was a different process. But it's true. I didn't thought it like that. And clearly for anyone out there that doesn't have that first entry with any other board member, that it was not part of the interview process, they should, as you were saying, reach out and engage on early conversations, because that will help on the day-to-day. When they need help from you, they'll call you directly, or when you need help from them, you'll already have probably break some barriers and you might see them closer, because it's true that as a CFO, as a founder, it's different. You got to know the investors earlier on and already have a relationship with them. But as a CFO, they might look like they are farther away. And one of the things that you were mentioning on be transparent, I would say that probably I guess all CFOs sees like that. You have a fiduciary duty with investors, shareholders, and so it's our responsibility to be as transparent as possible, because also the best for the business.
Absolutely. And I think it's funny because there's obviously the fiduciary duty, but there's also transparency in terms of being very open about when things don't go right. Even if you see them in the numbers, you can present that story in a different way, right? Like you can present it, you can gloss over it a little bit, or it's all good, but just, I would say, be as brutally honest as possible, because you're going to have that conversation sooner or later anyway. And then I think just the last point, in terms of your kind of, getting to know board members, you should never think as a CFO that we don't want to get to know you. Trust me, we really want to get to know you, because this is, again, as I said before, you hold the key to so much of the absolute crucial data in the company. And those insights we want to know always. So don't ever feel like you can't reach out to board members. You should absolutely feel like you can build that relationship.
Thanks a lot, Terese, for that. I'm sure people will find it useful. I would add a comment to what you were saying on the transparency, just to give the message to the CFOs out there, maybe that, because it's not in your shoulders actually somehow, the storyline that it will be presented to the board. So that's more on the founder side or the CEO. So guys, and don't worry, like, but yes, your numbers.
That's a good point.
Your numbers need to make sense. They need to be reliable. You need to give that trust to the board that all the information they are getting from you, it's valid, up to date, and has all the trust on it. And then yes, you need to work, but that's a different conversation, a different topic. I think we've covered it in other webinars or in other fireside chats. Is the CFO was the wingman of the CEO, right? And so you need to be helping them by providing all this information, and then work together towards the storyline and how you're going to message that to the board.
Absolutely.
Great. So we have heard some components of what helps build trust. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. From your point of view, Terese, what are the characteristics that set the best CFOs apart when presenting to investors and the board of directors to the company for the company business updates?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think it kind of comes back to, it's funny because, Jorge, yes, you're right, that the story gets also very much told by the founders and CEO. But I think still CFOs still tell a story with the numbers, they won't just show, okay, poof, here are a bunch of numbers, figure it out, take the analytics yourself and draw conclusions. You still take those numbers and you draw out a narrative. And, that narrative is incredibly important because, again, numbers can tell different stories, right? And so I actually think a lot of what this huge skill set of a CFO is, it's to say, okay, these are the numbers, this is what's going on. How do I communicate that in a way that it makes sense, but also especially in a way that it gets to some strategic initiatives of what we're doing? And yes, you're right. Then often, the CEO and the founder may come in over that. But it's, again, the numbers tell a story, and the ability to really structure a narrative there is absolutely key. Another point, of course, is, but this is super obvious, being extremely detail-oriented and on top of your numbers, right? Because you're going to get questions. So knowing them inside out, but I also think that's like a baseline for most of you. That is kind of what you, hopefully you're all doing. But I think then the third point is, it kind of ties a bit into the narrative piece, being as strategic as possible. So I think what we've seen in the last couple of years is the role of the CFO or the finance person in an organization. It's evolved a lot from, many years ago. It's like, okay, here's the numbers person who present the numbers, to now really that's not what it is. The CFO is a strategic person who's part of the organization and finds strategic conclusions from the numbers and works really closely with the CEO and the founders. And so that ability to think strategically, that's what sets CFOs apart. And that's not easy, by the way. That's an entire skill set in addition to numerical capability, because that strategic mindset means that you can almost take the 360-degree view, because you have that data, you see what's going on, in the sales organization, you see what's going on in the product organization, and you can draw conclusions from that you then communicate, first of all, most importantly, to your founders and CEO, but then that also, informs their storyline and it trickles down to the board members. So that strategic thinking is absolutely key, I think, for this role. And, who is the modern CFO?
That's great. I'm taking notes, Terese, because some of those insights will be used for sure. And I 100% agree, right? That numbers can tell a story. I love that, and the narrative and all this. That it's true. You need to keep that in mind. For sure, the numbers that you're going to present, you just need to make sure that you could be asked about any number that is out there. So make sure you know them, from all the angles possible. Let me change gears a little bit and move to the recent market dynamics. Looking back over the past 1.5 years, we have seen the level of accountability to which tech companies are being held become a lot higher, right? So how did you see the best CFOs both navigate and manage these uncertain times with their investors?
Yeah, this is a great question. And it's been a time of a lot of upheaval, right? In the last, I would say really, 12 to 18 months. And it's been a really tough time, and especially also for CFOs. So what's been happening a lot in the market is that in the golden days of 2020 and 2021, we had a mindset, and this is, by the way, very much also because of us investors, we had a mindset of growth at all costs, which meant that, as long as you're growing revenue, it doesn't really matter too much about the health of your business. The unit economics are off, what that looks like, your burn ratio didn't really matter that much. And that a lot of that was fueled from the folks on our side, because we were fine with that. And then what happens naturally in a market downturn is all of a sudden, the health of a company matters more. And it's not just growth at all costs. It's much more about, are you growing in a way that makes economic sense? And so the trickle down of that effect has been that what we've seen over the last 12 to 18 months is a lot of companies have had to say, oh, okay, our burn per month is way too high. We need to actually cut that back, and we have to increase our runway significantly. Now, a lot of that work has been falling on the shoulders of the CFO, and of course also other members of the team in terms of rethinking, hiring plans, headcount, and that's been really, really, really tough, right? Has a lot of implications. But CFOs have had to spend time navigating that and say, okay, this is really a numbers game. how do we get our runway to a point where we feel comfortable, where the next time we need to raise a round, we feel like traction will actually, be there. How do we cut in terms of our costs? What costs can we afford to cut that also won't be too harsh on our growth? And that's almost an impossible equation. It's so tough. And so that's very much been, in the hands of certainly the CEO and founder, but also just as much in the kind of in the remit of the CFOs. And I think what we've seen there is the ones that have been most successful and have been able to navigate this changing market condition the best are actually the ones who have moved with speed and moved with a lot of kind of intent to fix these problems, because time, is your enemy in this case. If you're able to cut runway quickly and then focus on saying, okay, how do we build a business that's healthy here in terms of strong unit economics, etc., the quicker they've been able to do that, the better the outcomes for the company have been. And we've been very lucky as a fund that our founders have and CFOs have moved very fast. But in the cases that they haven't, you see companies suffering a lot. So I think that I would say is point number one. So being able to move quickly in terms of navigating this changing landscape. The second thing is the key word there is changing landscape. So basically, when we saw the market starting to go sour, none of us know, and we still don't know, how long is this downturn going to last? Is it going to get better next year? I think, we're also going to talk a bit about that later. Will it get worse? So you're basically in this environment with extreme uncertainty. There's always a lot of uncertainty, but now it's just 10x. And so I think another thing that we've seen in terms of navigating this is CFOs who are able to create scenarios for what they're going to do if things evolve in different ways, because you don't know how, the market will evolve. And so if you can create scenarios for different situations, you at least have a plan that you have ready. And then as the crystal ball becomes more reality and you kind of see the world playing out, you can then hone those scenarios. So that's another really important thing. And then I think the third one I'd call out is the ability to be nimble. It's related a bit to the scenario point, but basically be able to shapeshift according to what you're seeing in the market. That doesn't mean that you're jumping from one business model to the next, every 5 days, but that you're also able to actually change according to what you're seeing, while at the same time having that big North Star that you always have in the back of your mind of where you want this company to get to. Some of those things you could say we could apply just as much to CEOs and founders, but a lot of the analytics, the strategic thinking about this has also been on the plate of CFOs. So CFOs have been playing a huge role in making sure that the companies they work in can navigate these uncertain times.
So am I right at inferring, based on what you were saying earlier, that CFOs own most of the cost cutting and some of those initiatives? Would you say that the relevance has increased for CFOs with the change in this growth at all costs to efficient growth?
I think so, right? Because if you think about, growth at all costs, fewer numbers mattered. It was a case of, okay, let's have a look at revenue and let's see what's going on there and pipeline, etc. All of a sudden now, there are a whole lot more metrics that we're looking at again. We did a couple of years ago before, the crazy days of 2020 and 2021. But all of a sudden, if you're a SaaS company, you're going to want to look at SaaS metrics. You're going to want to look at your payback, your CAC, your LTV. You're going to want to look at your burn ratio. All of these things all of a sudden really matter. And that means they all are the analysis that CFOs are going to make. And from those, you make the strategic decisions, right? Because they will tell you, well, should you raise now? Should you raise later? Is our payback period maybe so good that we should actually be putting more money into the sales organization? So I think absolutely the CFO's role has increased in importance. And I'm glad it has, because I personally prefer, seeing more numbers and seeing companies move towards, being very, very focused on developing the right KPIs.
Great, thanks. And yes, I do think we all agree, right? I think CFOs relevance and also to put it on our side, I think CFOs have, and we talk about the fiduciary duty. I would say we have the duty and we have the responsibility to make sure we keep an eye on all these metrics And probably we shouldn't forget that if we go back to that golden age of growth at all costs, we should all, remind ourselves of these days and make sure we keep that in our mind, and make sure that we know we have that importance inside all the organizations, and we have to fight for that, and we need to own it. No, we need to win it. We need to earn it. So help the teams be that business partner that supports them, but also keeps an eye on all those relevant metrics which are key for the business.
Absolutely. And I do hope I agree with you when we go back to slightly more, growth at all cost times, because we will, because that's how the market works. Hopefully all of us have learned, a lot of good insights from this period we're in now. And I agree, the more that you can keep watching out for the health of the business, the better, because at the end of the day, that's what creates a really good business at scale, right? Like that never changes. Growth at all costs, that's risky.
Great. So I'm going to go back to, you already introduced the next topic on what is going to happen, right? And based on what you said, and I don't know if you would agree or not, and actually I would be much more curious to know if you don't agree, but I would say that we are seeing an uptick on positive sentiment with regards to fundraising and the overall. I think where we were at the end of last year, there was a lot of pessimism, like almost the world is going to end. Some investors giving the message out there to their companies: don't invest in sales and marketing. No one is going to purchase any software or anything like that. I would say, at least from what we've seen in market, in the market, yes, still companies are making, if the business plan for that makes sense, if the ROI is positive, they still keep on investing and all those things. But how do you see, how are you and Atomico looking at the current fundraising landscape? Are you expecting activity to pick up going into 2024, or still not sure?
Yeah, well, this is scary because now we can look back in time in a year and see whether what we were saying is correct or not. This is the crystal ball moment. Hopefully it ends up in a positive side of things. But basically, I mean, I totally agree with you. I think this is pretty normal of whenever these shocks to the market happen. Then in the beginning, because there is so much uncertainty, there's a way stronger reaction, right? And usually it's kind of a pullback to say, okay, we need to be really, really careful. And then things have certainly settled for sure. And I think also, probably it wasn't as bad a crash as you maybe could have imagined, and some people were afraid of could have happened. So that is very positive. I think also what we're seeing in the market is that there's an interesting polarization of there's still a lot of capital with us investors, because a lot of us raised funds in the good times, so we have money to invest, which is really, really good. But what we're seeing is that money will tend to follow areas that are of a lot of interest. So generative AI is one right now, right? Where there's a lot of capital that's going into that. So I would say, yes, there is a movement, a more positive movement in the market, but it has caveats. Like the money is funneling into certain areas big time, like a lot of money. I think still what's the case is if you're not in one of those, we tend to call them hype areas because it gets a little bit hyped. If you're not in one of those areas, I think you'll still find that when you're raising a round, you will be faced with more scrutiny on your numbers. And that's where the CFO comes in, really on your numbers than you were, before the market downturn happened. So I don't think that's changed, but I actually don't think that's a bad thing, because I think, again, this goes back to this idea of creating healthy companies. And so, us investors, I think we lost sight of that. And we weren't asking the right questions. I don't think it was any of the company's fault. We were giving money where we didn't ask the right questions, right? And so I think that is a good evolution of there being just more scrutiny and a healthy part of this market. I do also wonder, when I think about next year, I think what we could see on the being pessimistic for a moment, I wouldn't be surprised if it's also a very, very tough year, for many companies who might have gotten to the end of their runway and then there isn't capital for their business. I think that's likely to happen. They may have raised in 2020, 2021, run out of cash. And, because there's more scrutiny, they may not be able to raise. So my prediction would be, I think we're going to unfortunately see more companies go out of business, which is super painful. But if you do have the right metrics, you have shown that you have are building, a sustainable business, then I think the money will find you. And there I agree with you, Jorge. Then, the market has become much more positive. But again, it comes with those caveats, I think.
Hope
I didn't burst the bubble there.
No. But there's a lot of things to be thinking, right? And
Yeah.
and personally, right? You were saying there is capital, so that's a positive. On the other hand, you need to address if you are part of those hype areas or not.
Yep.
Really, how I always look into that when I spoke with other founders or some other events, it was the time of do your homework, right? As a founder, you need to do your homework. You need to understand where you are, where investors are, where are they investing, how do you fit into those, and make sure you have the answers and that you don't lie to yourself, because that's key to make the sound business decisions that you need to be making today, right? And so I was trying to take that into account. Also, on the other hand, you mentioned those companies that are going to try to raise money next year. Probably there's been a lot of companies trying to hold back on fundraise early 2023, at the end of 2022, right? So you might see a large amount of companies trying to go to the market through 2024. So competition is going to be fierce.
Exactly. Chasing the same capital. That's another point. It's truly true. And for that reason, actually, one thing that, to consider also as a CFO, as you're thinking about the runway of the business, the next round, is there something you can do in the meantime? Do you need to go out and raise that big Series C next? Or can you get some venture debt? Can you do an internal round? Is there something smaller that you can do that kind of bridges you a little bit to that point where, it's funny because in the past too, when we talked about those type of financing options, there almost was this like negative connotation around them for a couple of years. There absolutely is not. So I can tell you from the investor point of view, if we see a company that raised venture debt, wonderful, great. They got more capital. That's great. Or the same with internal or bridge rounds, right? That's very normal these days. And I think at the same time as well, when you get to that point of fundraising, I wouldn't be afraid of doing a flat round. And in fact, if you do a down round, you do a down round. The most important thing is that your business survives and you get people in the room, in your board, who will add value to it. I think being humble around that is really, really important, right? So those dynamics have changed a little bit, and having enough capital to weather this storm is absolutely key.
I hope you agree with the next sentence, but that's at least how I saw that back in the day as a CFO, and today also in Abacum, is I need to make sure that I had explored all the different options to extend runway availability inside the company, or make sure that I have under control all the cash flow scenarios. And so that could mean you mentioned earlier, cost cutting, OPEX control, all that. It's part of the day-to-day ops that any CFO should be, looking into. But then on the other side is make sure that you are up to date with funding options that you could think of, venture debt or even equity. But that also comes with homework, right? And you need to be doing that homework ahead of when you need the money. And the worst thing is to find yourself that you're running out of cash, and then it's when conversations become really, really nasty.
Yep, could not agree more. And the golden rule there is that we tend to think about as investors, that at least to start thinking about that and start raising 6 months before you run out. That's kind of the very final cutoff. Anything before that is probably preferable.
All right, we have those 6 months, right? Probably as a founder, I would like to have more.
Exactly.
Runway, but yes,
very last cutoff. Yeah.
I want to hear your thoughts on the next topic, because I was actually talking to a friend right before this call, and their company had gone through M&A opportunities, right? So fundraising is not just all, times of uncertainty. While some companies might gravitate towards fundraising, others see opportunities for M&A or prioritizing others' profitability. So although this one is tough, how do you see risk companies in your portfolio, or maybe companies you have known from past experiences? What would you say for the companies in stronger positions? How should they best navigate these times to capitalize on M&A prospects?
And here you're thinking, Jorge, in terms of them buying companies or them being bought?
Let's start by yes, it is. No, and I love that. And I actually didn't thought about the second one, but I would say the ones that acquire. Let's say you are in a strong position and you can actually use current market dynamics to think about that.
Yeah. So I think price is everything, right? So if you kind of start thinking about, okay, price is everything, and then strategy is everything. Actually, let me start at strategy. So as you're thinking about your business and where you want to grow, if there is an area that is already being served by someone else, and there's a great team behind that, there's great technology there too, which would take you maybe years to build, and this could become an integral part of your business and could really help your revenue grow. I mean, that is an obvious reason to look at, okay, do we actually go out and buy someone who's already done that, right? Like, completely and very valid. And then the second piece then is price. And here you're in for, good times. So because valuations are lower these days, it's also easier to purchase companies. And especially because one thing is valuations, but also especially because, as I mentioned before, if we go with a hypothesis that, let's say, next year, more and more companies are going to run out of cash, and as Jorge mentioned, there's more and more competition for capital as well, there will be companies who are looking to be bought. And that also means that the price that they're willing to take will be lower. So it's actually an excellent market to be looking at M&A opportunities and purchasing something. The one caveat I'll mention to that from an investor point of view is where we sometimes get a little bit more concerned is if it seems like the core now of your business will be driven, and the majority of your revenue will be driven by this M&A you're contemplating. That gets a bit scary for us, because really we invest in the product that you built with the team that you built, and all of a sudden you say, hey, well, actually 60% of our revenue is going to come through this acquisition. That feels scary. So I think you may have some negative reactions to this, but if it's something that augments your business, can supercharge your revenue, not taking most of it, then I think it's a fantastic environment to be looking at these opportunities.
Great. And let me take on the question you asked me, because also as I was thinking about it. So, okay, maybe I'm a company, I look to my numbers, I'm gonna try to build a solid foundation, right? I want to build solid business unit economics to try to fundraise next year. Would I need to consider, so as you were saying, no, I also need to do my homework. I need to see, okay, who am I going to be raising from? Am I a hype sector or not? How much appetite is it going to be? Maybe I found myself that I need to to work towards not fundraising, but maybe sell.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you were saying, watch out, next year maybe prices are pushed down because of a lot of companies maybe on that situation. What would you say? Is there anything different that maybe you need to work on towards that sell? Right? Okay, I'm no longer going to work to fundraise. I've made my decision, and maybe I just need to get the company ready to be sold.
Yeah. Oof, this is one of the most fundamental questions, right? Because this exit and what you want your company to end up being, that's really hard, right? And there's also considerations both for the founder, the CEO, but certainly also for the CFO in terms of what just makes most sense for the business. So what I would say on that is it's a nuanced question, because there are some founders we see who say, okay, I've been at this for 10 years and I'm exhausted. I don't want to go all the way to this IPO. I want a maybe smaller exit. I want to, look for, $300 million M&A. That'd be great. And then that's it. And then I'm going to do something else. That happens all the time. And that's totally fair. It's a very personal decision, right? And then you discuss that with your board and see how obviously they think about it as well. But then there's the slightly more kind of maybe not completely voluntary situation where you see that your company may be in a space let's say, for example, crypto is an example, right? Maybe in a space that's really hammered right now, that's really, really struggling, and you're doing your homework, just as Jorge said, because this is so important, and you see that there's just not a lot of investment flowing into this space right now. Like, it's really hard to fundraise, and the number of rounds that are happening are next to none. Then you can kind of extrapolate from that, okay, that's going to be tough in terms of you getting investments. And then once you have that knowledge, absolutely, it's a conversation with your board, because then you can also test, well, are they willing to give you, is there internal funding there? What do they think? And you may reach the conclusion that actually the best scenario in terms of kind of the next capital event is an M&A. It's exiting this business. You're not going to let it go to zero because you can't, get fundraising done and let everything fizzle out. But instead, actually, you have an M&A opportunity that you find, and then you get something back for yourself, for the employees, hopefully for your investors as well, and you all can land, on your feet. And that's an extremely valid situation to be in, and one that I don't think any investment fund out there is not very familiar with when they think about their portfolio. And then the question then is, okay, then you kind of shift gears. Who are then the buyers? What's the appetite in there? And there's a whole, flow of process that you go in when you think about, getting sold. The one advice I would also offer on that is, the better, this is a bit counterintuitive, but the better your performance is as a company, the higher chances you will have of an M&A. It's counterintuitive because you think, well, if I'm performing well, why don't I continue, just fundraising? But again, there might be some market dynamics, like a market crash and like crypto, that mean that that's really hard. If you're in a situation where your numbers look strong, perfect time to be doing it. Because again, buyers will be like, great, this is a great business. It's working well. It's a hard choice.
It is, but it's... Well, let's see when the day comes.
Exactly.
So we have 4 minutes left. I have, on the last part, I'll do a rapid fire. I'll shoot you a couple questions. Then I want to see if there's questions from the audience. So as a board member, if you could hire for one quality in the CFO, what would it be?
Absolutely. What I mentioned before, strategic mindset. Absolutely.
All right. What surprises excites you the most when the first CFO joins a business?
Oh, getting additional insights from the numbers. Like, this is great, right? When that happens, you're like, oh, actually, this was happening in the business numerically we haven't heard about before. That is a wonderful surprise to see. Hopefully it's a good surprise, by the way, but regardless, it's good to have additional insights.
Okay, and that's for me. What's the most important lesson you've learned? I've learned from my relationship with investors over the years. I have to say, as a CFO, it was, it's a relationship that you need to nurture. Terese mentioned that earlier, right?
Absolutely.
And as a CFO, you have this fiduciary duty. You need to keep that in mind. At the same time, you're part of a team. You are building a team with, you're building a company with your team members. But so, for me, it's a matter of, okay, make sure you build those relationships, you earn the trust, you give them the credibility of when they ask you, when you come to board meetings, you come prepared, you control all the numbers, right? And so they will see in you like a solid business partner. So the CFO not only needs to become a business partner for the CEO. That's something that a lot of people mention and talk about, and to other leadership members, but also for board, right? For more board members. You are all in this journey. Everyone wants the best outcome for the company possible, and so you also need to work hard to make sure you make the most out of that relationship. Let me see. I do not know what questions we might have from the audience. Let's pick a couple. So from Alex, hi Jorge and Terese. I have a question. What role do you advise CFO should play between the CEO and the board?
Oh, that's a good one. Okay. Shoot, we only have a minute. I feel like we could talk about this for a long time. So between the CEO and the board, I would almost say it's not so much between, but more they're all these three elements are all working together, right? The CFO has all the incredibly useful inputs and that the CEO needs to make a bunch of decisions. And that then also is communicated back to the board. But the board, again, wants to also speak to the CFO directly to see some of the sources and how they think about it. So I think it's like a holy trinity in a way, right? The CEO, founders, the board, and the CFO, they all work together in beautiful ways.
I agree. I think as a CFO, you need to work really close with the CEO. Make sure when you're going to communicate into the board that you're fully aligned, and therefore that that what Terese was mentioning, that you're going to provide a transparent view on the company, being vulnerable in a sense, right? You're going to say what is not working accordingly to the plan, and then what you need to make sure is that you have the solid narrative to make sure that okay, this has not worked the way we expected. This is what we learned, and this is what we're gonna do to change it, right? That's key. And then you also need to be bought into that strategy, into the strategic thinking, because you might be approached independently, and therefore you need to make sure that you understand the business and the strategy, right? Because when a board member might reach out to a CFO, it's not just because of a number. They want to know why this number matters, what happens with this number. And so in order to become successful, you need to be able to provide really sound answers to that, while being a wingman to the CEO to work towards talking to the board. Last one, if we may. What are some innovative or successful fundraising strategies that have proven effective for organizations recently, especially in light of any recent changes in the fundraising landscape or donor preferences? That, Terese, is for you.
Any innovative fundraising strategies? This is not innovative. We've seen it for a while, but I highly recommend it, especially in this environment. Build relationships with investors way advanced of when you're raising. I mean, Jorge and I were a great example. I think I knew Abacum more than 12 months before we ended up investing, and they were at the right stage where we can come in. That is absolutely key, because again, in this market where capital is scarce, you're fighting against others to get that capital. And if investors spend more time, they build a closer relationship with you, they know you more, they can see the progress of your company over time. That means that you have such a competitive advantage from your competitor who's also trying to raise from them. It's not very innovative, but it's definitely a successful fundraising strategy. So really, really think ahead when you're building those relationships and nurture them. They're really, really important.
All right. I'm sorry. I know there were some more questions there, but we ran out of time. Terese, can't thank you enough for joining today. And I thank the audience for logging in and asking questions. Hope all of you find it useful, and please don't hesitate to connect to our next events.
Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.